Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
The Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center has long been a key cog in the Pentagon's efforts to protect sensitive information from leaking to foreign adversaries. But the Pentagon is now ramping up a new evaluation regime under the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Program, evaluating potentially tens of thousands of contractors that hold sensitive CUI. For more on what the CMMC program means for DIBCAC, Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday talked with Nick DelRosso, the center's director.
Currently, we have a vital dual mission, right, in this realm. And we're here to support the department in that role. These cyber requirements, whether you're talking CMMC or the DFAR 7012, aren't really new, right? So the 7012, which is the basis for the CMMC requirements, goes back probably a good 10 years at this point, where the DIB has had to implement these requirements in support of protecting the CUI for the department. So, in that sense, these requirements have been around, right? And the department's changing some of the requirements as it evolves, and they've created the CMMC program. But the core of that program is the NIST requirements, which date back to the creation of the DFAR 7012. So our mission has been to monitor and enforce compliance with those requirements on the 7012. So we've been performing assessments against the Defense Industrial Base probably a good 6 years at this point, in support of that mission. Now, our role is starting to shift as we transition to CMMC. We're going to be executing what's called level 3 assessments, which is really the NIST SP 800-172, the subset defined by CMMC. So those are going to be new requirements that industry is having to support for those requiring that level of protection. The other parts of that, the CMMC level 2, is essentially what we've been doing on the DFAR 7012.
It's been an interesting journey, to say the least, over the last 10 years since the introduction of those the 70-12 clause. And really, I think it was within probably 2 or 3 years that there were various audits and reports that came out that found that while a lot of companies were attesting to meeting the requirements, a lot of companies were in fact not meeting many of those NIST requirements that are a part of 7012. So as you've gone through these audits over the last 6 years or so, what have you learned, and how can you carry that forward with the preparations for level 3 CMMC assessments?
Yeah. So I think what we've learned, by and large, right, industry wants to comply. I think their heart's in the right place. As you go further down the supply chain, right, some of them don't have the technical subject matter experts, right? And without those SMEs, right, it's hard to understand all the nuances of some of the technical jargon. And I think the department's done a pretty good job of trying to abstract, right, and make the requirement broad, so it's not driving a specific implementation. But when your small mom and pops go to those standards and try to apply, a lot of the times they will outsource to a consultant or provider. And so what we've seen, right, in some cases, is that maybe the consultant that came in that they contracted with didn't lead them down the right path. So even though they were trying to be compliant, we've identified that, some of these companies gave it the solid effort, but kind of didn't hit the mark. And we've seen that in cases with the consultants or where they've tried to do it themselves. And I think the department has put out a lot of information to help in that regard. And, I think that the companies truly want to comply, by and large. And, that information is useful. But at the same time, the companies have to try to understand how to implement those requirements. So I think from the consultant side, right, if you're outsourcing and you don't have the expertise in-house or any IT expertise in-house, right, you want to use the tools that you have at your disposal. And whether it's utilizing some form of AI to review a proposal and try to provide some insight in what they're asking, or really reaching out to your counterparts within industry, right? And we've observed from the security standpoint that industry has been very collaborative in this realm. It's not something that you typically see industry execute on with their competitors, but they've kind of set aside all of the differences when it comes to security, and a lot of them have worked together. So I would encourage those companies that are struggling to reach out to their industry associations, some of their peers, and just have a discussion on what each of them have done to implement the requirements.
And beyond the technical expertise that some of these companies lack, when DIBCAC goes through an audit, are there common areas where companies often struggle in meeting those 110 NIST requirements?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the two biggest that we've seen, right, are the multi-factor authentication and the use of FIPS encryption, right? Particularly, I think FIPS is a challenging one because it relies on your vendor stack from your IT. So if you're using products that don't support it, it's hard to get compliant quickly because you have to switch out that tech stack. Other times the products may support it, but you need to enable the FIPS mode, which requires additional testing because anytime you change a configuration, that may lead to some breakages in the system. So it's something you want to take your time implementing and make sure you test all the requirements. On the multi-factor side, right, there's certainly things like security keys or tokens that could meet the requirement. There's other, I'll say less hardware-based, sometimes requiring a phone, right, or other factors of that authentication. But again, all of it depends on your tech stack that's in place to kind of implement something that works within the scope of your enterprise network.
That's Nick DelRosso, the director of the Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center. Watch his full conversation with Justin Doubleday at federalnewsnetwork.com. It's part of our Risk and Compliance Exchange.